Hey everyone, it's Mandy Gibbons here, and I'm here with Mike Dyson from Good Blokes Co. And we're going to be having a bit of a conversation about resilience, about men and resilience, about men's mental health, and also I want to tap into a little bit, if we can today, and we will probably segue off into different things as well, in regards to emotional resilience as well, because that's super important. So, Mike, would you mind sort of telling everyone a little bit about what you do, and then we'll go into your story, because I'd love to hear a little bit more about your backstory.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, Mandy. So I run Good Blokes Co. I work also in a number of schools mostly around Western Australia, helping teachers to have great conversations with boys around wellbeing, resilience, mental health, emotional intelligence, relationships with women. All of that kind of stuff comes up. And I also have a Good Blokes retreat and a How to Run a Men's Gathering training where I teach men to run the kind of things that I run, whether that's events or blokes nights or mates weekends or father-son camps. And I also run some father-son camps and also a mother-son camp as well, which is a great experience to get boys start to talk about the real stuff, realize that they can have those conversations with dad or with mum, yes. And that mum and dad are human beings with their own sort of faults and flaws, and to start to learn from the diversity in their community. So getting blokes conversation, basically I help communities to lead better conversations around masculinity and manhood.
Yeah, and when I saw that you're helping especially teenagers to be able to communicate with their mums, I was thinking that was really good, especially and I think just in general anyway, it's when you're a teenager, you kind of feel like you're on your own a lot, right? And you feel like mum and dad don't understand. You forget that mum and dad were young once.
Yeah.
And have been through a lot of stuff also, right? And they don't seem so wise, when you're that young, you kind of like go, well, what do you know? And so I thought that was really, really cool. And
it's a great experience, and a big part of it is getting boys to see their mum, in that case on the mother-son camp, as just someone who can have fun and to have a laugh.
Yeah.
So often our parents, when we're a 15-year-old, our parents are the people who cook dinner and get us to school and do things for us. But do we actually know, as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, what is my mum really hoping for? What are my dad's ambitions? What does dad really struggle with? How does mum find it being a woman in the modern world? So they get to hear from their mum or their dad on the father-son camp, and also a bunch of other people's perspectives in that community as well. It's a pretty great camp.
Yeah, it is. I've seen the testimonials for it, and I just thought, oh my God, I love this so much. This is so good. Yeah. And so what's your backstory in regards to how you came about doing this? Because you always find that when people do this kind of work, like all of us, right, where there's always some life experience that we've been through ourselves that has sort of brought us to this point.
Yeah, so I guess two things really. The big one was I got a phone call from my best mate's wife saying that my best mate had checked himself into hospital and was worried about suicide. And I was really happy to have those conversations around how to support him. There was a really tough year or two of trying to work out how to have his back. And I've always been happy to have these conversations. But the thing is, I wasn't having these conversations with him in the 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, however long it was leading up to that. So for me, I think it was a real crisis of mateship. I didn't feel like I was supporting my mate well enough so that he could actually come to me and have those kind of conversations. And then not long after that, I found myself on a hospital bed in the emergency department, worrying I was having a heart attack. And then the doctor leaned over me and said, "Mr. Dyson, there's nothing wrong with your heart. You have anxiety." And I was like, what? I'd spent 10 years working as an acupuncturist, teaching people how to meditate, getting their yin and yang in balance and how to look after themselves. And here I was in this, state of real crisis. I took 2 weeks off work at that point. I'd never taken more than a day or two off in my life. This anxiety had really crept up on me. So as someone who knew about anxiety on an intellectual level, I didn't see it coming myself. And also having had that recent experience where I didn't feel like I'd supported my mate as well as I could have, I started sitting in men's groups and then got drawn into rites of passage work, and then saw the incredible potential for young blokes to learn about this at an early age, and then saw the appetite that schools have. There's so many schools around, Australia, around the world, trying to get their kids, teach their kids the skills to look after themselves and to look after their mates. And that really sucked me in. I love it. I absolutely love doing what I do now. Leading those conversations for men and leading those conversations for young blokes. They come into it really cautious and awkward, like, oh, we're going to talk about our feelings. And they come out like 10 kilos lighter with all this stuff off their chest. And yeah, it's a pretty great line of work to be in.
That's awesome. And, I think that's one thing that I always think, well, I wish I knew now. I wish I knew, when I was at school, what I know now. Right? I wish I had those tools. I mean, there wouldn't be all that life experience there, but just to be able to have those tools, I love seeing people going into schools and helping kids and, helping them, arm them with what they can do to help cope emotionally and to be able to support each other. And because I even know when I was young, no one ever knew what was going on with me. I used to hide
Me too. Same.
everything, and so, and people use, I remember I was very intense as a child, and so because I kept everything to myself, right? And so it was very interesting, like when I see my friends' children and stuff like that, and I think I was like that as a kid. You know what I mean? And how cool is it now that they've got opportunities to be able to go to someone like you. So, being able to help men and being able to help women as well, but children is such an incredible thing. And to be able to do that from at different stages too, because obviously at different stages, they're going through kind of different little chapters of their life, right, throughout their childhood growth and into teenagers.
And I think the appetite's really there in schools. I think parents want more from schools. I think our communities aren't what they were a couple of hundred years ago, and I don't think young kids in schools and teenagers feel really connected to adults in their communities. So who else is giving them the skills, and who else is providing places for them to have beautiful conversations around adulthood and around challenge and around resilience and around difficulty? And so I think the demand is getting more and more and more and more. And a lot of it's falling down to teachers who aren't really trained in social emotional intelligence and social emotional awareness. So they're found that schools are asking to deal with a lot of this sort of stuff, but they're not necessarily supported to have the skills to have these kind of really open conversations where young people can learn from each other. We don't have to be an expert going in and creating conversations where students in schools, boys in schools, can talk about what's hard. That radically changes the landscape in the school. And we don't have to be teaching them anything. We just have to provide a place where we can sit down and go, right, fellas, what's actually tricky here? Because when we actually provide a safe enough space for them to open up, everyone's got a story, everyone's got something going on, and you feel totally different. You sit down in a classroom of 25 mates and you realize there's 5 or 6 blokes that are really struggling. There's 12 blokes who've been through something recently. Like your whole attitude towards everyone else in that group totally shifts. It's powerful work.
Yeah, understanding and compassion. And I think too, when these type of conversations come in, this type of work comes into schools too, I can see the impact that it would have on bullying. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the thing, like there's, no matter which side you're coming from in regards to bullying, you're always feeling like you're not being heard, right?
Totally. And that typically comes from, a bully who doesn't know a healthy way to identify what's going on with him and a healthy way to let it out. Yes. And it goes towards a kid who is, doesn't have anyone to talk to about it either. So when you provide a place for a kid to go, I actually didn't really like how I was treated by this kid last week. Everyone goes, oh, right, I get it. And then when on the other kid's perspective, is like, I've got some stuff going on at home and I don't know how to handle this. And I don't think I sometimes behave how I want to behave. I don't think anyone goes to school thinking, how can I be the worst bully and make sure everyone else has a terrible experience? I really honestly don't think anyone wants that. I don't think there's many sociopaths in our world. I think most bullying comes from you know, that classic saying, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And when we don't give blokes a chance to, you know, to get support and to talk about what's going on, then it can quite easily get channeled into hurting someone else.
Yeah. And in regards to blokes, like, how have you found, like, over the years, like seeing, especially like teenagers, you know, they're into manhood and so forth, like that would impact them incredibly, right? Because even through like dating and all of that type of stuff, and how they respect women and respect themselves as well.
Yeah, it's huge to have those conversations and to be able to learn, to step into manhood with a bit of an idea like, oh, actually everyone has difficult stuff going on in their life. And when I get a chance to explore it, maybe I've got hopes and dreams that I hadn't really thought about. I think many of us as blokes are taught to kind of ignore our inner world, ignore our emotions, and not to be too big for your boots and the tall poppy syndrome, and not to talk about what you hope for and what you dream for. So I think to give boys a chance to explore that as they're stepping forward is huge. And the other point you tapped on there in terms of getting them to explore relationships, I think most of us as parents want our boys to have great relationships, whether they're gay or straight or whatever. We want them to have great relationships, but are we teaching them the skills to have great intimate relationships? I think a lot of boys feel cut off from this idea of intimacy. You're not supposed to hug your mates. You're not supposed to be soft and cuddly and gentle. And then all of a sudden they've had 3 beers. It's the end of year 11. They're at a party and they go upstairs with someone. You got to show a bit of vulnerability and negotiate. Oh, what are you up for? Are you interested in this? Like, do you want to do this? Can I touch you here? That takes a level of vulnerability. Whereas if they go upstairs thinking, I'm supposed to be the boss, I'm supposed to take charge, I'm supposed to have all the answers, that's actually a recipe for disaster.
Well, that's it. The repercussions of that, you just don't know which way it's going to go, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so cool. I love that you're having these conversations. This is awesome. And like with the men's like work that you're doing, sort of like, I'd love you to like, if you've got any stories that you would, because I love hearing like real life stories, you know, how you can share someone's journey if you are able to do that, because I know that obviously there's confidentiality in some of this as well. So
yeah, well, certainly the number of comments that I get back are extraordinary. Like, I didn't realize I wasn't the only one who had this problem. I didn't realize there's so many other blokes who thought about things in the same way, because we're just going around pretending that we don't have these kind of inner lives, sort of convinced as men, like, oh, I don't have any emotions, I don't have any of that. We're vaguely interested in this idea of like, oh, maybe a friend of mine might have an emotion one day and I can support him in that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is the way people.
I'm not laughing at it. I'm laughing with you on that,
yeah, exactly.
Because being a resilience coach for men, that's something that I also, like you hear guys, they're very, it's even in some of my posts that I'll put out, like someone will say, I might know someone who,
Yeah, we're emotional creatures, aren't we? Yeah. We think of us as humans as, particularly as men, as logical, decision-making creatures. Most of our behavior is driven by habit and emotion. And the more we can actually become aware of that, the more we can start to make better decisions around looking after ourselves and having, building awesome lives that look like what we actually want them to look like.
Yeah. And when it comes to, because I know for myself when I'm working with men, we emotional resilience is really important.
Huge.
And digging into that with them, but I also find that it really depends who I'm coaching at the time, how we actually go about that, right? Because some guys will, that they have this perception that which a lot of guys do, even females do, of that you can't be the white knight who falls off the horse, right? You've got to be this person who has your shit together all the time.
Yeah.
And especially like if you're in leadership positions, work positions, like that in your career, CEO all the way through to like my clients are all the way through from CEO all the way through to like supervisors in oil and gas and mining.
Yeah.
And there's the pressure of the guys their crew, right, or their team, having all their personal problems, then coming to them with all of that, and then not only dealing with all their own stuff, right, they're then dealing with everyone else's stuff at the same time, and they just feel like they're trapped. There is nowhere to go. They can't fail, and they've got to like deal with all of this at the same time, you know.
Which is overwhelming for a lot of blokes, and those of us have been taught like pretend that you don't have anything going on. I think that cuts us off from building a level of emotional intelligence, and to actually, God forbid, the idea of just being okay with being emotional. I often tell the story of when I had to put my dog down about 2 years ago now. And it was really hard. And, you know, I knew I was going to miss her. She'd been my best mate for 15 years. The hardest thing for me was having to be the one to actually, you know, pull the pin on her life. That was really hard. And afterwards, I found myself mowing the lawn at my wife's work. I was in charge of mowing the lawn and just tears flowing down my face. And I just remember in that moment thinking, I'm really sad. I'm really emotional. And I'm actually mowing the lawn at the normal rate that I would mow the lawn. It didn't make me less efficient. It didn't make me less productive. It didn't ruin my life. You know, my penis didn't fall off just because I had a good cry. You know, all of these things were actually okay. And what if, as men, we could actually have emotions and just get on with it? You know, if you need to take a day off because you had to put your dog down, then great, take a day off. But, you know, following that, like, what if we can actually talk about it? What if we could come to work and say, yeah, I'm having a really rough day because I had to put my dog down, and still reckon I can meet that deadline by 3 o'clock and I'm all good. I'll let you know if I need any help. Rather than our options are A, pretend that it didn't exist, or B, pretend that I've broken my leg or something and I need to take a week off. Like, there is a middle ground. We can actually sit with those emotions and be okay with them, whether it's sadness or fear or anger. They don't actually have to, you know, destroy us in the workplace. I think we have this idea that if we admit to any of this stuff going on, then I have to be in therapy for 3 years and I have to take 6 months off work and all. No, you can actually just be okay. You can learn to be okay with those emotions and go on about your day and care for yourself at the same time.
That's it. And I've noticed too when you know, a lot of blokes that I have coached have been worried about getting blacklisted as having mental health issues, and how that would, you know, affect their career terribly. Like all of a sudden they would get managed out, you know. And I mean, and that does happen.
It's a real thing. It does happen.
Yeah.
How do we create cultures where it's actually okay to have anxiety now and again? How can we actually be, you know, we value mateship so much in this country, but do we actually have our mates' backs? Do we actually get around them when someone's struggling? I think there's a big cultural shift that needs to happen so that we can start to actually support people when they're struggling and realize that it doesn't have to mean the end of a career.
That's it. And, you know, I really feel for guys, you know, whether they're single and have, you know, big goals, fathers, you know, whatever it is, and they've got their goals might be, you know, they have children and they're supporting their family, and then all of a sudden it comes to breaking point for them, and it's like they're so worried about they've got so much stuff bottled up inside them, right? They don't know what to do with it. They feel like things are just going to explode, but they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing because they feel like they've got no one to turn to. But they, you know, they also feel like they can't take any time off, especially if it's going to affect pay or whatever. And also they're scared to have a changing career as well, not even just from an emotional point, but from a perception point of like, well, he's failed as a man, as a provider, and all of that. You know, there's a lot riding on them, right?
Yeah. So we don't teach blokes the awareness. So it gets to that point, it gets to crisis point, because how were we dealing with those emotions 6 weeks ago, 12 weeks ago, you know, 9 months ago? Well, we were doing nothing about it. You know, and that's a recipe disaster. So if we can get blokes to actually notice when things aren't going so well, do those preventative things and actually learn some strategies to look after yourself, because we all actually have strategies, that some of them are healthy and some of them are not. We might not realize why we're drinking 6 beers a night instead of 3. It's like, what's actually going on there? What's actually driving me towards that? And is there a healthier version of that? Is there something else I can do to get on top of that stress, rather than just simply drinking more beer. Maybe I could talk to someone about it. Maybe I could go for a jog. Maybe I could go for a gym, go to the gym. Maybe I could journal. Maybe I could meditate. Maybe I could go for a surf. It doesn't have to be all the hippie weirdo things, you know. Maybe I could tinker in the shed. There's a million things we can do as strategies to prevent that stuff and to manage it in that moment. But yeah, certainly finding workplaces where we could actually talk about that sort of stuff more often.
Yeah, that's
make it easier for all of us.
It's only probably a few months ago, and I had a quad bike was delivered to the house, and I was super excited about it. The guy was saying, well, what are you doing home during the day? You know what I mean? And I said, well, I work for myself, blah, blah, blah. I told him what I did, a resilience coach for men. And he goes, well, what's that? Like, so I told him a little bit about it, just very, like, briefly. I could tell he's very old school, right? And then he said, well, I don't need anything like that. He said, I've just been through a divorce and beer handled all of it. And I said, oh, well, good for you. I just left it at that, you know. I wasn't. And I just thought, but I could see the fear in his face, right, when we were talking about it. And I really just wanted to give him a hug, but I knew that wasn't on the card. So but it is that perception. And then, like, thinking of him, and then it was probably only a few weeks after that, I was talking to a guy in Netherlands. He was in his early 20s, and he didn't feel any of that. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, he was very emotionally aware, and actually didn't really know that many guys that were around him that were sort of very standoffish when it came to their emotions and stuff like that. And I was like, we were on a call about something else, but I was like, you know, just like brainstorming with asking him all these questions. I was like, I know this has nothing to do with, it was all about video creation, right? But I was just wanting to hear all this information. So it's just so interesting, like the change. It's not always about generation, right? But it is very interesting about where how people's lives can be so different depending on their upbringing or where they're located or their environment.
Yeah, and some of us have great role models in our fathers. I was talking to a bloke on one of my accounts recently. He said, my dad was always really open with his emotions. He was a really hardworking man. He got the job done, but he also knew how to be caring and loving and open. And he feels like he doesn't have any of those problems. On the flip side, he finds it really hard to follow through and follow through in his commitments and all that kind of stuff as well. So, you know, a lot of it comes from where we're from high schools we were in and from all of that kind of stuff. But certainly the average Aussie man does feel like he's supposed to be tough, supposed to be strong, supposed to be unemotional. The Man Box study out of Queensland University of Technology is an interesting one. You've probably seen that. But that found that 67% of Australian men feel a certain pressure to live that stereotype. And there's nothing wrong with being the breadwinner. There's nothing wrong with being hardworking. They're good things, right? But when those things mean they, like you said earlier, they get, I couldn't possibly change my career, that will be a failure. Or I couldn't possibly do this. I couldn't possibly take a sick day for anxiety, that would make me a failure. Well, that's leading to some pretty stark problems. You know, 3/4 of suicides in Australia are men. That shit's not genetic. That is not genetic at all. That's our culturalization. That means we shouldn't ask for help. We shouldn't have any problems. So when this stuff bubbles up, we don't even have the words for it, let alone knowing what to do with it. So I actually think there's a responsibility for those of us, like your mate in Denmark, wherever it was, Netherlands, for those of us that have this awareness, when you see that this is a problem, like we can actually get around and we can support blokes who find it hard to have those conversations. I think if we don't, then it's just leading into those blokes having significant issues themselves and the impacts on other people around them. Like we talked about with bullying and violence. Those blokes who felt the most pressure to be in the man box, in that Man Box study out of Queensland University of Technology, were far more likely to have been violent with another person as well. Because anger is seen as this okay way of dealing with our problems. Not supposed to be sad, not supposed to be afraid. Anger's like kind of okay. I'll just yell at someone. I'll just yell at someone online, you know. It's not a great outlet, you know. If beer's there's nothing wrong with beer. Beer's a great like painkiller. If you need it at the end of your weekend, great. But if that's your only strategy, I think it's a bit of a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that's it. And not only that, if you drink too much, you make really silly decisions, right? That's and I know it's funny, with the guys that I've coached, they've said, we are so grateful for you, Mandy, because we would have made some stupid ass decisions for ourselves, especially with their mates, because their mates, especially if it's like a relationship, like a marriage separation or something like that, and all their mates are saying, just go out and get drunk, just go and get laid, mate. You know, anyone, the drunkest chick, la 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 la. You know what I mean? And they're just going, we're so glad that we didn't do all those things. And the reason that they came to me in the first place was because they saw their mates go through something similar and be super, super destructive with their lives and really screw things up for themselves. And they didn't want that for themselves, right? And so that's why they, and I'm so proud of them, all my clients.
To take the chance to actually learn from something instead and to move forward.
Yeah, and to
rather
go,
than
well,
just
I'm going to get
the
help.
pain and potentially do something stupid.
Yeah, that's it. And to be able to ask for help.
Yeah, the other thing for me is, like, if I'm really trying to have my mates back, is telling him to drink 15 beers the best strategy for him to get over a breakup? Like, I'm not afraid. I'm not opposed to us. You know, you're broken up with your girlfriend, go to the pub, have a few beers, you know, have a night off, get over it. But actually we need support. Maybe he needs to see a counsellor. Maybe he just needs to talk with his mates about it. Maybe he needs to, you know, to think about what his plan is moving forward. Does he need some time by himself? Does he need to jump straight back in another relationship? But, you know, is he going to be able to work that out just by going to the pub and drinking 15 beers? I don't know.
The decision making might be a bit like after it's not a time to game plan.
yeah, exactly.
That's so funny. And I think too, when you're able to have conversations, you are able to it's like a nice release, right? But also it can help calm you down a little bit. Also, it's good to have tools that be able to help calm you down. But
100%.
you know,
sometimes just that conversation is enough. Sometimes that conversation, I just needed to chat with somebody, got to work through it in my head. Maybe it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Maybe I'm going to do this next. You know, the conversation itself sometimes is enough. It doesn't always mean you need to go and see a psychologist or you need to get professional help. But if we have those conversations, maybe we can pick up, oh, mate, you're really struggling. I think we need to get you some help. And, you know, those conversations might be what lead you into getting the help that you need to move forward, you know.
Yeah, that's it. And I think too, you know, with relationship breakups as well, there's so much grief that goes on, right? There's the grief about the life that they've had is it's no longer the same, right? Everything has changed. There's the perception of them failing is the man in the relationship, and you know why they might have, you know, lost that chick in the first place. What they did wrong, they'll feel like, you know, how did I screw up to make, you know, her want to leave, or for this relationship to fail, or whatever happened, or her, you know, maybe she, you know, slept with someone else. Who knows what the situation is, right? And so there's all this, and then they're not sure how to explain that to their mates, like how they're feeling within themselves, that they're feeling like they've deeply failed, and the grieving process of like, what do I do now? Like, you know, this person was such a big part of my life. Now I'm on my own. I don't even know how to deal with that.
Yeah, that's shame that you're talking about there, which is the, you know, which I was talking about is often a man's kryptonite. That feeling of being not enough, being not manly enough, being not worthy as a man. I think most blokes are familiar with that. And that's what stops us from sometimes asking for help. And that can be really dangerous, because in terms of men's mental health, when we start to feel like a burden to others, that's when we're really at risk to ourselves. But also there's a violence researcher out of the US, James Gilligan, who's done 30 years of research in prisons in the US and in the UK. And he reckons the main cause of violence in young men is shame. I don't feel man enough. I'm going to find some way of making myself feel, you know, more successful, more manly by pushing someone else around, by stealing a car, by being violent, whatever it is. So when we're in that place of shame, it's dangerous for men. And if we as mates can get better at not shaming others, at being curious, what's going on for you, mate? What do you think? you know, what do you think you want to do from here? How are you actually feeling? Rather than, you know, oh, you just need to do this or you just need to do that, which makes them then potentially heaps that shame on top. I think we need to get better at holding our own shame firstly. And then once we can do that, we're going to get much better at being a good mate to our mates.
That's it. Because then you have a lot more understanding and compassion, and can really hold that space for them as well. And that's the thing, right? I think also it's important to know who your mates are who can do that for you, because
you don't have to open up to every single person. But if you don't have mates that you can really open up to, you're not set up for success. You're not set up for resilience, as you would say. There was a study done in the US in 1984. They asked a whole bunch of hundreds of thousands of Americans, how many people do you feel like you can really talk to? The most common answer was 3. They had 3 people they could talk to. In 2011, the study was repeated, and most Americans would say 0. I've got no one I can talk to. And this is worse for men, that social isolation. There's only one group of Australians who are more socially isolated than elderly men and elderly women, and it's young Australian men. More and more and more isolated. When we don't have someone else to talk to, how do we process the everyday shit, let alone the really nasty shit that happens after losing a job, after a breakup, after a troubling, you know, medical diagnosis? You know, it's a troubling trend in our society that we're getting more and more and more isolated. We need to be able to build communities where we've got blokes, men, women, young people, old people in our life that we can actually have better conversations with.
Yeah, and feeling,
crucial.
You know, being feeling so isolated, it's a very lonely, it's a very traumatic feeling to feel like you are so deeply alone, right? And that there is just no one that you can turn to and talk to.
Yeah, totally. And just the feeling of loneliness, the loneliness, the feeling of being alone is as dangerous to your heart, not your emotional heart, your actual physiological heart, as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
And the life expectancy, it's one of the most highest risk factors of death is loneliness. And there's people everywhere. We're so hyper connected by mobile phones and everything else around us, yet we're feeling more and more and more lonely. I think as men, we need to, you know, be aware of that shame and push through it. And every time you build a stronger connection with someone else in your life, you're not the only one who benefits. There's someone else on the other receiving end of that as well. And it means you've got to put yourself out there. You might get rejected. Maybe that bloke doesn't want to have a game of pool with you. Maybe he doesn't want to shoot some hoops with you or whatever, go fishing or whatever else you're planning. And if he doesn't, that's fine. But you've got to keep putting yourself out there to build those quality of friendships where you've got blokes to hang out with on a regular basis, and then blokes you can take that conversation deeper with. Because if the only support person in your life is your partner, that's not healthy. That places a lot of pressure on that relationship.
It is big time. That's it. And the thing is that like then not only then you kind of become like each other's coaches, right?
Yeah.
Type thing. And then that's a lot to tackle, because then if you're struggling with that person, you don't want to be able to tell them because you've really become like their caretaker. So and so nowadays in a relationship, you're my lover, you're my best friend, you're my financial partner. We keep the house together. We might be parents together, like all of these other things. And I'm supposed to be your counselor and that as well. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of women in same-sex relationships who feel like they have to be everything to their partner because their partner doesn't have any other mates. Yes. And one of the biggest benefits I see in finding a group of men that you can sit with on a regular basis, doesn't have to be every week, once a month, once every now and again, is that you get that emotional support outside of that relationship. So that relationship gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Yes. It's not just about being happier in yourself. Your relationship gets stronger. You build stronger friendships with your mates. You've got more blokes you can have a laugh with and kick the footy with or whatever. And also you get some people you can actually have a chat with about what's going on with your life, rather than having to rely on your partner for every single thing. Yeah,
that's it. And the thing is also is that, you know, not every partner has the capability to even do that for you in the first place, you know.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot of capacity for me to hear from my partner, here's all the things that are wrong about me. It's easier if that person can take that out, get the support from other people they love, and then bring it back in a more gentle way and say, hey, here's what I'd like to be different. I think the extended support system is what we're built for. We're built to live in communities. We're not built to live in isolated, separate houses with one other support person in our life, and a workplace of people I can't really have a conversation with. It's not what we're built for. And when we feel that pang of isolation, that pang of I got no one to talk to, it's because it's hardwired in us as human beings to collaborate and to be part of a team and to be part of an extended family and to have more people in our lives. We live in a pretty disconnected and strange world.
Yeah. And especially at the moment, there's this, you can tell, I mean, it's kind of always been like that and getting worse, but I suppose in the last couple of years, it's really become super apparent how isolated people are, right? And so now more than ever, it's super, super important for us to be able to, you know, even if you're not able to actually see someone in person, but even if you're getting on group Zoom calls or something like that, it's better than like isolating yourself completely.
Yeah, totally, 100%. In whatever format you can.
Yeah.
Even if it's just sending a bit of an emoji to someone, if that's the only language that they can receive, a couple of text messages here or there could literally save someone's life, you know.
Yeah, that's it. I know. Even for my friends and clients as well, I use phone a lot, like Messenger or WhatsApp, and just do little voice back and forth, you know what I mean? Little voice messages back and forth. Yeah, and especially, and for guys, that's super helpful too, because if they're not really sure how to put stuff into words, they can just like have blah, blah, blah. Just say whatever you got to say. Just say
a human voice. A human voice can be so good, just to hear someone else's voice at the end of the day. Oh, I know you're at work. Just want to say you're a bloody legend and looking forward to catching up with you next weekend when you're back down in town, you know? Yeah. That sort of message when someone's out on a, you know, FIFO mine site somewhere, hates all the people that he works with, that message can be like a lifeline. So you know, I talk a lot about how social media can really derail us and cause unhealthy connections, but we can use that stuff to our benefit, I think, in huge ways. Yeah,
that's it. I believe so too. I have to admit, I do try to, I'm pretty careful how I use social media, you know, because I want to be able to, because I know where I'm headed and what my purpose is. And so I kind of like to use it purposefully.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can all stop and take a breath. I think there's some of us, you know, like we talked about the bully in the schoolyard, there's stuff that a lot of us will say online. It's like, if that person was right in front of my face, would I phrase that differently? You know? Yeah,
that's it. That's so good. And so in regards to like resilience, do you have, because I'd really, and you know, with this is a story for a client or for yourself, and emotional resilience, is there something that you would really specifically love to share today with people that you know that has really heavily impacted you, that you feel like you would really like to be a takeaway moment for them in this conversation that we're having today?
Yeah, so I think the big thing with resilience for me is it's hard to be resilient in the face of challenge if we don't know what's going on for ourselves. So I think as men, as human beings, I think a lot of our behavior and our habits are driven by emotion. And if I'm trying to be resilient towards a goal and other things are pulling me off track, it's self-awareness is the first place to start. So the easiest tool I find for that is journaling. There's other things you can do, chatting with a mate, having an accountability partner, mindfulness. Journaling, I think, is just so simple because all you need is a pen and a bit of paper, and you can just take some time to actually look at what's actually going on. So, you know, it's a thing you can do every day. It's a thing you can do every time you're feeling just, why do I keep picking up my phone? Oh, I'll grab my pen and just see what comes out. And building that self-awareness, I start to get like, oh yeah, it's when I fear that I'm not going to be right, and I'm not going to do a job and I'm going to muck it up. That's when I start getting distracted. So journaling is, I think, is a hugely useful way to build that level of self-awareness, which I think is the most powerful tool we have in terms of achieving our goals. Because I think for a lot of the time, it's our emotions that drives us off course. So I can remember a bloke who was on the retreat last year, messaged me a little while ago, said, I've been journaling every day since the retreat, and he told me all about all the boxes that he ticked off. It just keeps him on purpose and on task and aware of all of those distractions and the obstacles that can get in our way. So, yeah, look, I think the way we're socialized as men makes us, cuts us off from that inner world. So any way that you can build of connecting back into that, whether that's chatting with a mate, contemplating on yourself, journaling, whatever it is, that I think is the number one tool. If you do that on a regular basis, you can start to build more of that self-awareness, so that when those times where you're not being resilient, you've got a bit more of an awareness of what's going on and what you can do about it.
That's it. And the more that you take responsibility for that, and as you're building resilience with the baby steps and the larger leaps as well, right? Bigger challenges, whatever it is in everyday life, then you basically you're building more rapport with yourself as you're doing that. And then it's funny because you can look back 3 months or 6 months, and you'll go, wow, look how much I've achieved because I've just been taking these small steps. It's like your client, right? It's just, you don't really realize how far, what you can achieve and how far you can go until you start taking consistent action. And then you kind of go, hell, I'm pretty friggin' awesome.
Taking responsibility, I think, is huge. It's really easy to blame others. And even if my boss is a wanker and the bus was late and all of those things, well, it doesn't help me to worry about that. It helps me to think, well, what can I control? What can I do next time? What different words can I use? How can I get to the bus early, whatever it might be? What are the things I can put in place so I know that I'm being impeccable with my word? And the more I think we take responsibility, the more it can actually make us feel empowered. It feels powerful to take responsibility. It does, And let other people, that's their problem, that's their side of the equation. What can I own here? What can I do better?
Yeah. And it does. It feels. I know for myself, each baby step I take, big, small, whatever it is. I like to challenge myself often and a lot. And I get really excited about it because, I'm always thinking, okay, well, what's the next step for me? What's the next step? But I also come from a place of self-compassion at the same time, so that when I'm going through those challenges, I'm not being harsh on myself, because I've spent years basically not being very kind to myself, right? So I'm very conscious of that now.
I think that's huge. And what you've just talked about there is self-care and embracing challenge. I think a lot of us talk about emotional intelligence and being softer, more vulnerable, more caring. And some of us assumes oh, well, if I'm being soft in general, that means I'm not strong. Well, I actually think it's the opposite. I think we need to be taking more responsibility, to be more accountable, and to be sort of firmer with our word and firmer with our actions with each other, and softer and kind and more gentle. I don't think those are opposing things. I think the more I'm kind to myself, the more resilient I am, the more I'm aware of my emotions, the clearer and more on point my actions will be. So, I think when I think about healthy masculinity, for me, it's all about the yin and yang. How can I be more reliable, more dependable, more resilient? And how can I be kinder and gentler and a better listener and more receptive? And I think that stuff makes me more resilient, and being more clear and more accountable gets me to understand myself even better. I don't think they're opposing. I think they support each other, the yin and the yang.
Yeah, so do I. And, it's such an incredible gift to be able to give yourself, right, when you're able to be kind to yourself and not beat yourself up. Because, there is that feeling of, I suppose, weakness of being kind, because being kind to yourself and being understanding with yourself doesn't mean that you're playing victim, right? It just means that you're self-aware, but also very self-accepting of yourself and how you're feeling at that time. And it's okay to feel like that. Okay, what do we do now? You can make a decision based on self-acceptance, right?
Totally. Kindness isn't making excuses for myself. It's not kind. You think of yourself as like a parent. It's not kind for me to just give my kid the day off every day for 6 months.
Yeah.
It's kind to support them to find a way to go to school. And it's the same if I'm struggling with myself.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about being a cop-out. It's like being kind and being gentle. And then on the flip side, doing what I can to whatever I want to achieve, whether it's getting back to work or whatever it might be. Being kind and being accountable.
Yeah, that's so cool. And before we wrap up, just where can people get hold of you? I mean, I know where people can get hold of you, so I'll include those links. But if there's, you know, some places that you would just like to share, because this will also be in audio format as well as video format as well, so people can listen.
Gotcha. So I post a lot on Instagram. You can find me at Good Blokes Co on Instagram, and on Facebook as well, the same handle, Good Blokes Co. If you're a LinkedIn person, just Mike Dyson, just Dyson with a D, like the vacuum cleaner, not like the boxer. You can find me on LinkedIn, and send me an email if people have got questions around what I do and my camps and retreats, or working with young guys, working in schools. I'm always happy to chat about this sort of stuff. It's literally my favorite topic of conversation. It's harder to get me to shut up.
That's okay. I'm the same. I get it.
Yeah, totally. Always happy for a chat.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. It's been brilliant.
Thanks for having me on, Mandy. Always a pleasure to chat.
Okay, big hugs. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Cheers. See ya.